Hello and welcome to TIP International Radio. I'm your host, Leah Maston. We are showcasing prestigious top professionals from all industries all over the globe to share their experience and stories of success. Joining us today from Canada is an honored member of the International Association of Top Professionals, IAOTP, and he was selected as not only their top professor of the year in higher education, but also selected for the Lifetime Achievement Award, Male Visionary of the Year Award, inducted into IAOTP's $1 Million Diamond Club, and selected this year as Man of the Year. He is an adjunct professor at the University of Waterloo and professor at the University of Guelph-Humber. Please welcome Dr. Daniel Andreae. Hi, Dr. Andreae. Thanks for joining us today.
Hi, Leah. It's an honor and a privilege to be speaking to you.
Dr. Dan, you have devoted a significant part of your life and career to researching and educating those affected by neurodegenerative diseases, especially Alzheimer's. Tell me, what got you interested in this field?
Well, it is, Leah, a passion of mine, and it goes back quite a long way. As a matter of fact, I kind of fell into the position as the first executive director of the Alzheimer's Society of Toronto, which amazingly was the first society formed anywhere in the world. And actually, I was head of another organization, the Health League of Canada, and we had established the National Eating Disorder Information Centre in Toronto, and the only, by the way, centre in Canada that offers a helpline throughout the entire country for people suffering from anorexia, bulimia, and disordered eating. And so that was set up, but one thing we also did, in addition with that organization, is we sponsored public education evenings at a big downtown library, and we focused on certain subjects. It could be public safety, it could have been diabetes, or whatever we decided to do. We'd often partner with another organization, and a dear friend and mentor of mine, Dr. Eva Phillip, said to me one day, Dan, why don't you do something on Alzheimer's disease? It's growing in its importance. And I looked at her and I said, Alzheimer's, how do you spell that? What is it exactly? We're going back to 1985 at this point in time, when Alzheimer's was just really a glimmer, in a sense, out there. People thought it was senility or hardening of the arteries. People really didn't know. So I called the Alzheimer's Society and I said, Leah, let's put on a joint evening. Can I speak to your executive director? And they said, well, we don't have an executive director. And I said, really? And although I was pretty young at this time, maybe a third the age of some of the people in the organization, somehow I successfully was chosen as their first executive director. And that was a wonderful opportunity because it really was a question of moving from a volunteer organization to a more professional one. And that meant that we had to start from scratch in so many ways, from developing a newsletter to, or carrying that on anyway, to a counseling program, a resource center, support groups, public education, supporting research, and fundraising to raise awareness about the cause and to link people up to resources to help them, because caregivers are so stressed by looking after somebody with Alzheimer's, a disease that can go anywhere from, let's say, 5 years up to 15 or 20 years with no cure in sight. So I feel very proud of what we accomplished during that period of time. And then I stayed involved in the association, and a few years ago became the patron of their organization, lead patron of their organization. And that was a wonderful experience too, because I got to work with people around Toronto to open doors, to raise awareness to, and build up a very good and powerful Patrons Council. And they again were very helpful to extending the scope of the cause too as well. So I'm passionate about it. I had both parents who had neurological diseases, Alzheimer's actually, and we've lived through it, and many of us have lived through it. So my passion has actually increased since then. But in addition to that, there are other neurological conditions too as well, all to do with the brain, and the brain is a passion of mine in many, many ways. And the brain is amazing, as we all know. It's 3 pounds of an organ which determines everything about us, what we think, feel, what we experience, perceive, fantasize, imagine. And they're about, without getting too sophisticated, Leah, about this, but they're about 100 billion neurons, which are like little cables in our brain that link up with each other to allow us to function. And each of these little cables, these neurons, have about 10,000 connections. So there are literally trillions of connections in our brain going off every single second. It's just absolutely mind-boggling. And the brain can work well, okay, but there can be problems too as well. So whether it's epilepsy, which is another neurological condition, autism, Tourette syndrome, there are several ones that need to be addressed, and there's so much research that needs to be done and help that needs to be given to all of these.
Some areas of expertise is mind-body behavioral medicine, particularly how stress can affect the brain. Tell us about that.
Yes, well, absolutely. Everybody listening to this broadcast is coping with stress. Anybody who says, Leah, I'm not stressed, is simply not telling the truth. Stress can be very positive, by the way. It's called eustress, E-U-S-T-R-E-S-S. So if you win the lottery, yay, okay. If you're in a new relationship or getting married or getting a new job and you're excited about it, that is good stress. There's also distress, which is stress which, is problematic, certainly over time. When it comes to stress, really it's a question of coping. And if we feel we can cope with something, then the stress will be there, but it'll be manageable. If I'm a good tennis player and I'm going on to play somebody in front of other people on a tennis court, I'm going to be a little nervous perhaps, but I'm going to feel competent. But if I'm not very good in mathematics and I have to solve a math problem right on the spot, my stress level is going to go through the roof that way. And so we always have to adapt to everything externally that happens to us, or internally, our own thoughts and our own emotions. And so basically, and in a good way, stress can help us reach peak performance. So if we have to do something, get ready for an exam or an interview, whatever, the stress can actually bring us to great heights. But what we don't want to do is burn out. We don't want stress to carry on and become chronic. For example, in the old days, we're going back, millennia, on the plains of Africa, if a tiger jumped out at us, our bodies responded, and saved our lives. If you, Leah, and I were crossing a street and a car came toward us, we'd jump back, our hearts would pound, our breathing would increase, the blood would flow to our muscles, certain physiological changes would happen that would, again, save our lives. Our bodies are exquisitely and magnificently built to withstand stress like that. We'll call them acute stresses. We'll call them ones that are needed at the time to be responded to, and then our body goes back to an equilibrium. It's called a homeostasis in fancier terms, and then we recover and carry on. Problematically, when stress continues on and we don't deal with it, and it begins to overwhelm us, then problems occur. Potentially, and that could be digestive problems, headaches, it could be skin problems, it could be even heart issues. We know psychological issues occur as well, trouble concentrating, lack of attention, similarly, irritability, a whole series of psychological effects play a role. So the thing is, we want to nip stress in the bud, or at least to deal with it, knowing it's going to be with us, in positive ways to maximize our lives and our performance. Now, if it doesn't get dealt with over time, and again, things can happen, burnout can occur. And burnout is really different than stress. Stress is when we have too much, too many obligations, multitasking, and we feel a bit overwhelmed. Burnout is the opposite. It's a lack of energy, a lack of motivation, and really the battery is run down, and we need to recharge that as our adrenal glands, which are on top of our kidneys, responsible for our stress response, need to be looked after and again recharged in that way. So stress is always with us. We have to deal with it. There are ways to deal with it. The brain, of course, sends out messages to the body to respond to stress. And the good news, though, as I mentioned, is that our bodies are made to respond to stress, and anything we can do to help fortify that is going to help us.
Having over 2 decades of professional experience in higher education, what is some advice you give to your students?
Well, that's a really good question. I love teaching. I've done it for a number of years at university and college. And I think, first of all, Leah, that For me, the most important thing in a classroom, though, is to provide a safe and comfortable atmosphere where students feel encouraged to express themselves and to exchange ideas with me and with other students that way. You know, when students come into a classroom, it's easy for a professor to look at them really one-dimensionally. They're there for that 3-hour class or whatever, and it's really focused on the topic, under discussion in the lecture. But in fact, the reality is that real education happens when we recognize that students are human beings, and they come into the classroom with their own desires and doubts and excitement and goals. And so we have to look at the whole person sitting in front of us, and anything we can do to encourage that person to feel that they're in a safe spot, that they can indeed be open to learning. It's a bit like adding water to a flower. If a teacher, professor can create that kind of atmosphere, then that's a big, big step forward. For me, education is when the head meets the heart, when we can make education relevant and real to students so they can apply it to their own lives, so it's not so far above them that it's forgotten, a few hours later or crammed in for an exam down the road. It's got to be made real, and they can apply it and go, I understand that now. When that light goes off, that gives me the greatest amount of satisfaction and thrill, and it does sometimes, not all the time with everybody, but when it does, it's a really exhilarating experience. So when it comes to advice to students, I say to them, it's important to be open to experiences, that finding out what you don't want to do is just as important as finding out what you do want to do. Because at that age, when people are searching around, and we're talking about 18 to 23, 24, there are doubts people have. Am I choosing the right path? Am I doing it for me? Am I doing it for somebody else? And so to say, look, if you find you don't like something, that's a wonderful experience and finding and insight. Then you can move on to something that's maybe more suited for you. So really to reassure students and allow them to feel comfortable approaching me and to be supportive. So I think all those things are important. We all as human beings, Leah, I think have the same needs. We all want to be listened to. That's so important. There's not enough of that in the world. We want to be validated, taken seriously, and appreciated. And so by recognizing those human qualities that we all have, bringing that into the classroom, I find that goes a long way to creating an empowered student.
Was becoming a professor and social worker always what you had envisioned for yourself, or did you originally have a different career path?
Well, good question. I think we all search for different paths when we're younger. I always liked teaching. I always thought in some way I would do that. I wasn't exactly sure how I would do it. I did get an undergraduate degree in psychology, and then I went into social work too, as well, clinical social work. I came out of clinical social work and took a job as a counselor, but then I had a chance to take over this organization that I mentioned to you, established the National Eating Disorder Information Center, a hugely important problem, which is just as big a problem today, if not even more so. And so that took me on a certain path, which led me to the Alzheimer's Society. But when I was at the Eating Disorder Center or at the Alzheimer's Society, one of my passions, again, was education and going out and speaking to groups and talking about Alzheimer's disease, what it was, and I think reassuring people or offering as much hope as possible for a condition for which there is no known cure. Very difficult, but caregivers wanted information, they wanted support, they wanted reassurance, they wanted to know where to go for resources, so that was a big part of it. And then I ended up becoming president of the Ontario Association of Social Workers after that. Now, social work is a major profession in Ontario. Originally, I had taken a 6-month leave of absence from the Alzheimer's Society to achieve statutory regulation of social work in Ontario. A matter of fact, Ontario, the biggest province in Canada, was the only jurisdiction in North America without any form of standardization or regulation of social work. So all 50 states and 9 of our 10 provinces had some form of standardization. And this was problematic on many, many levels for public protection issues, because anybody can hang up a shingle and say, I'm a social worker and I can help you, to policy issues where social workers would do many things, like decide who was what's called compos mentis, which means who can make decisions. Even though 80% of those are done by social workers couldn't be included in law and legislation to do this. So that's another whole topic. But what started out as a 6-month leave of absence turned into a 10-year campaign through 3 different governments of different stripes and 7 different ministers of our crown. And we eventually did achieve regulation, which I think is one of the big highlights of my career. But a large part of that, back to your original question, was around education. It meant going around the province in several cities and talking about social work, what it does, how it helps people, educating people about the need for that protection, and talking about mental health issues too as well, and other things. So education's always been a thread through everything I've done. And then, of course, as a university professor, that was really the bread and butter of what I've loved doing.
Dr. Dan, you are very active in your community, including First Executive Director of the Alzheimer's Society of Toronto, Chair of the Patrons Council of the Society, Honorary Patron of Brain Injury Canada, Chair of the Advisory Council of the National Eating Disorder Centre at Toronto General Hospital, in addition to being the longest-serving president of the social work profession in Ontario and board member of the Psychology Foundation of Canada. I also understand that you are a special advisor to the Weizmann Institute of Science Canada and that you sponsor a neuroscience laboratory in your name. Can you tell us about that?
Oh, that's a really good question. I talk about balance, and we already have, and maybe I should work harder on it that way. But I think what we have to do is to follow our own passions, and what I love to do is to help organizations, sometimes smaller ones, to grow and flower and blossom by helping them with strategic planning, by linking them up to other organizations that can help them too as well, because nothing gets done on its own. It's always in conjunction with other organizations and people. So I love to do that. But if it offers hope and help to people, especially in the health sector, and I mentioned the brain for sure, but in other areas too. You know, there are other projects here in Toronto that I support, and I'll mention a couple of them quickly because I think they're important in terms of advancing, you know, the frontiers of medicine. There's a place called the Donald K. Johnson Eye Center in Toronto. It's a really world-leading center in looking at eye issues, and it's associated with the University Health Network, which is a major hospital network in Toronto. I support the work of a fellow called Dr. Alan Salamovic, who does incredible work in the area of stem cell treatment with eye problems. And just to give a quick vignette, there was a student at Queen's University outside of Toronto, and this is a very good student who began to develop eye pains and was going blind, and would go around trying to be diagnosed desperately, and nobody had the correct diagnosis. But he came to this really world-class center in Toronto, and Dr. Salamovic diagnosed him properly, and then, this sounds incredible, but he then took these microscopic tiny stem cells from his sister's eye and transplanted them into his eye, and his sight was restored, and he could go back to school. I mean, that is mind-blowing, and to be able to play a role in supporting a cause like that offers really emerging technologies and innovations really excites me too as well. Another one I'll mention is to do with something called the Da Vinci robot, and it's associated with working with several different disciplines, whether it be digestive issues or lung issues, cancer issues, whatever. And it's a brand new robot that allows a doctor to operate, even though the person is several feet away in the operating room, that allows them to go in almost like little chopsticks with cameras, and can go into microscopic areas that could never be touched before, and do miraculous surgery in a short period of time. And as a result, as I understand it, there's about 1/10 of the blood loss that would normally be achieved with laparoscopic surgery. The patient has a smaller scar, is out of the hospital earlier, less recidivism, meaning coming back to the hospital. And so not only biologically and surgically, but also in terms of human terms, it is an incredible advance in the area of surgery. So those are two examples, I think, that really are indicative of the kind of things that I like to support and give me a sense of satisfaction knowing that people are being helped and their lives are being enhanced.
How do you find time to balance everything, and why is it important to you to be active with these organizations?
Oh, that's a really good question. I talk about balance, and we already have it. Maybe I should work harder on it that way. But I think what we have to do is to follow our own passions, and what I love to do is to help organizations, sometimes smaller ones, to grow and flower and blossom by helping them with strategic planning, by linking them up to other organizations that can help them too as well, because nothing gets done on its own. It's always in conjunction with other organizations and people. So I love to do that. But if it offers hope and help to people, especially in the health sector, and I mentioned the brain for sure, but in other areas too. You know, there are other projects here in Toronto that I support, and I'll mention a couple of them quickly because I think they're important in terms of advancing, you know, the frontiers of medicine. There's a place called the Donald K. Johnson Eye Center in Toronto. It's a really world-leading center in looking at eye issues, and it's associated with the University Health Network, which is a major hospital network in Toronto. I support the work of a fellow called Dr. Alan Salamovic, who does incredible work in the area of stem cell treatment with eye problems. And just to give a quick vignette, there was a student at Queen's University outside of Toronto, and this is a very good student who began to develop eye pains and was going blind, and would go around trying to be diagnosed desperately, and nobody had the correct diagnosis. But he came to this really world-class center in Toronto, and Dr. Salamovic diagnosed him properly, and then, this sounds incredible, but he then took these microscopic tiny stem cells from his sister's eye and transplanted them into his eye, and his sight was restored, and he could go back to school. I mean, that is mind-blowing, and to be able to play a role in supporting a cause like that offers really emerging technologies and innovations really excites me too as well. Another one I'll mention is to do with something called the Da Vinci robot, and it's associated with working with several different disciplines, whether it be digestive issues or lung issues, cancer issues, whatever. And it's a brand new robot that allows a doctor to operate even though the person is several feet away in the operating room, that allows them to go in almost like little chopsticks with cameras, and can go into microscopic areas that could never be touched before, and do miraculous surgery in a short period of time. And as a result, as I understand it, there's about 1/10 of the blood loss that would normally be achieved with laparoscopic surgery. The patient has a smaller scar, is out of the hospital earlier, less recidivism, meaning coming back to the hospital. And so not only biologically and surgically, but also in terms of human terms, it is an incredible advance in the area of surgery. So those are two examples, I think, that really are indicative of the kind of things that I like to support, and give me a sense of satisfaction knowing that people are being helped and their lives are being enhanced.
Throughout your illustrious career, you have won numerous awards and have been recognized on an international level. This past year on the front cover of Tip magazine, honored at IAOTP's annual awards gala at the Plaza Hotel in New York City for not only Male Visionary of the Year, but also Man of the Year. What would you say has been the highlight of your career or most memorable experience that you've had to date?
Wow, that's a good question, Leah, that takes some thought. I think, first of all, let me say that IAOTP is a remarkable organization, and I'm so proud and privileged to be associated with them. I say that because it's a worldwide organization, and what they do is they link up professionals in a variety of different disciplines and jobs, getting us to connect with each other And these other individuals are inspirational. They are leaders in their field, and it's such a neat experience to meet them. For example, last December at the Plaza Hotel in New York, there was just a wonderful gala. They do it so professionally and with great warmth as well. And people from around the world came to hear speakers and also to receive awards for their own great contributions. So I think that the fact it's done so professionally, that it's done with a sense of compassion, and it's a wonderful organization. So in terms of myself, I think as I look back on my career, Leah, it would be, and I want to mention, by the way, that Stephanie Sarami, who's their executive director, is just a wonderful CEO who is responsive, professional, brings us together, and is a leading light, and I have a lot of respect and time for her. Anyway, back to the question of my career. I think it depends on the part of my career I'm speaking about. For example, when it came to the Alzheimer's Society, that was a great privilege and a thrill to be able to build that organization up on various fronts and gain the kind of exposure that it needs. And right now, Alzheimer's disease is a tsunami coming right over the horizon, and it's only going to increase in its scope, sadly so. But again, the work of the Alzheimer's Society to work with caregivers, to work with patients with early Alzheimer's, to support research leading to what I think will be a cure at some point, was tremendously exciting. Then, when I moved on to social work as the president, to achieve regulation against some tremendous odds, which took 10 years, was again a real learning experience for me as well, because there were peaks and valleys throughout this process. Nothing ever is easy that's worthwhile achieving. And so to succeed in that and know that the profession was recognized, that it would open doors for members of the profession, that it would also enhance public protection, was a really key achievement for myself, and I loved it. In terms of teaching, well, it's a passion, of course, and I think that for me, mentoring students and and watching them grow and even change career paths based on their own insights into what their strengths are, just being there for them in those little moments sometimes, I think is incomparable. And then doing the public speaking that I do, and the philanthropy and the mentoring of organizations, again, has also been a wonderful learning experience, because I'm learning every single day as well, and I learn from the people that I work with. So in each area, Leah, of my career, I think there have been some wonderful moments, some moments of trial and tribulation, but overall, I wouldn't change anything.
Looking back, what would you say you attribute your success to?
I think my success has to do with really understanding my passion and what really motivates me and trying to follow that. I come from a family of people in business, and that's fine. But for me, I had to follow a different route. Not that I think business is not good. It is, for sure. But I think following my own passion. The other thing is having mentors, and none of us ever do anything entirely on our own. It's always on the shoulders of other people, as has been said. One person for me is somebody called Dr. Eva Phillip, who is in Toronto, and she was a supervisor of mine in graduate school. And back then there were struggles for sure, and you're at that age where you don't know what direction to go in, and you're questioning, and so she was a wonderful rock, for me, and a sounding board, and somebody who believed in me. And I think we need somebody to believe in us, maybe only one person. And if that person is there, then, and I was fortunate enough to have met her in that capacity, and we've stayed friends, so over time. So she would be the number one supporter, I think, that really helped to encourage me in moments that were down moments too as well, because life is full of struggles as well. Let's be honest about that.
Right.
And it's perseverance that really I think is key. And developing a confidence and belief in oneself is also important, because we'll all be knocked at different times. So it's getting up and remaining true to your own values. So I think we all have to have a sense of who we are and what's important to us. And life's full of compromises too, but if we can stick to what is real and important to us and really plug into that, that's been really important to me too as well. Another person would be Dr. Eric Jackman. He's a fellow who's a philanthropist in Toronto and has a foundation called the Psychology Foundation, the purpose being to give psychology away to the public for free, and also to recognize that psychology is important in all aspects of our lives, whether it's our relationships or our politics or our work, whatever. To raise awareness is so important, because who doesn't want to know about themselves and what makes us tick and what makes other people tick, and then develop strategies to be able to live a more fulfilling life.
What's next for you within the next 5 years?
Wow, if you ask me what I'm doing tomorrow, I got to check my calendar. I'm trying to think on this one. No, I think what I want to do is a couple of different things. I want to do more public education, and I want to focus as well on working with the organizations that I do and helping to continue to build them up. Another one that's really, really exciting is at a place called the Michener Institute in Toronto. It's an educational arm of all these hospitals in Toronto as part of the University Health Network. And I've offered to hold a series over the next few years of lectures there. The Dr. Daniel C. Andreae President's Lectures on the future of health professions, because health is changing in so many ways, from technology to the resources, and could go on for another hour about that. But each year, different experts will come in to speak to professionals and the public about trends in healthcare and looking at how to take advantage of what's happening, in our society in regard to that. So I'm excited about that. One other thing I do is I support a university in Northern Ontario in a town called Sudbury, and it's called Laurentian University. And, Leah, originally when I was deciding where I would hold lectures, because again, I love this public education piece, I thought of Toronto, and it's a wonderful city. It's a cosmopolitan, booming, international city, but there are probably 200 events taking place in the city every night. And that's a wonderful thing, but up in Northern Ontario, they don't have the same access to experts that we would have here in Toronto. So I sponsor an annual lecture, and it's under the umbrella of Living in Healthy Communities. And it's very exciting because it's open to the public, it's free, and there was one held about 3 weeks ago up there. It's an annual event in January. It's awfully cold up there, but 650 people came out to hear a former NHL professional hockey player talk about his own struggles with addictions and other things, and so people are appreciative of that. And we've had Olympic skaters and skiers come up. We had a fellow called Stephen Page of Bare Naked Ladies, a well-known Canadian group, who talked about his own issues around mental health. We've talked about the brain. We've had a fellow, James Orbinski, come up, and he accepted the Nobel Prize on behalf of Doctors Without Borders. So the idea under Living in Healthy Communities, under a broad banner, we bring up different experts in different topics. So you ask, over the next 5 years, I'm committed to these things, public education in these places. I also want to do more work in the area of neurological diseases, and not just that in terms of the biology of it, as I say, but rather in terms of helping people cope. And so epilepsy is one that I'm going to be focusing on for sure, and that's a huge problem, and it's understated. But it has links to autism too as well, by the way. So I want to do work in that area, and also the area of stress, which we know am involved in, the area of burnout, and build on that as well. And some of these things are tied in, because the more burnt out we feel, the more vulnerable we are to certain conditions too as well. So I want to expand that. So I would say teaching, public education, working with these institutions, holding these lectures, and finding groups that need my help. And if I can do so, I'll proceed.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We are honored to have you as a guest.
Well, thank you, Lee. You've been a wonderful interviewer, and you've asked all good questions, and I thank you for your time.
For more information on Dr. Andreae, you can visit IAOTP.com.